You won't believe what just happened to this Ford Pinto. Unveiled in 1970, the Ford Pinto was Ford's new subcompact economy car that offered Ford's most basic form of transportation in an extremely affordable $1,900 package. The Ford Pinto was not particularly good-looking, and it wasn't fast either. But that didn't stop a man by the name of Jack Stratton from seeing a diamond in the rough with the Pinto. In this video, I will be examining how the Ford Pinto went from a clunker to a beast in the form of a Pinto Pangra. The Ford Pinto is one of the most infamous cars in automotive history. Introduced in 1970, just prior to the first OPEC oil embargo and the gas crisis that followed, the Pinto was initially a huge success for Ford, with sales of more than 800,000 units in its first 2 years. Then, on May 28, 1972, Lily Gray was driving her 6-month-old Pinto down a stretch of California Interstate 15 when the engine stumbled and stalled. A 1962 Ford Galaxy braked hard and rear-ended the Pinto, which suddenly burst into flames. Gray escaped the car, but died of her injuries soon after. Her passenger, 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw, suffered burns over 90% of his body. It was the first of many fiery wrecks involving the Ford Pinto, incidents that resulted in over 100 lawsuits that would cost Ford dearly, both in money and in reputation. How did the Pinto come to be, and how did it come to be so dangerous? Watch on to find out more about Ford's first subcompact car that tragically became famous for the wrong reasons. Small imports, most notably the Volkswagen Beetle, had been growing in popularity in America since the 1950s, but it wasn't until the late 1960s that Detroit started to take the threat seriously. General Motors invested heavily in the Vega, hoping to steal a technical march on Ford. Strapped for cash, AMC developed the low-cost and largely successful Gremlin. Ford, meanwhile, was stymied by infighting. Semyon Bunky Knudsen, late of GM and now Ford's president, wanted to focus on larger, more profitable models, while Lee Iacocca, VP of Ford's North American operations and Knudsen's boardroom rival, argued for a subcompact car. The Pinto was developed in just over 2 years, far shorter than the 43-month development cycle typical for Detroit. One way Ford engineers saved time was to use components and know-how from Ford's European operations. The rear axle was from the German-designed Capri, already sold in the U.S. as a Mercury. The base engine came from the British Ford Anglia, and the optional engine was part of a new engine family being developed in Germany. To keep weight down, engineers simply lopped off the rear of the car, along with much of its underlying structure. Traditionally, engineering is completed before tooling for a new vehicle is created. But as part of the Pinto's crash schedule, tooling and engineering took place simultaneously, which made changes difficult and expensive. Iacocca was famously inflexible on anything that might delay the program. In the 1977 article, Pinto Madness, a devastating and in places exaggerated expose of the Pinto's dangers, an engineer told the magazine Mother Jones, whenever a problem was raised, that meant a delay on the Pinto. Lee would chomp his cigar, look out the window, and say, "Read the product objectives and get back to work." In the end, Iacocca met his goals. When the 1971 Pinto made its debut, it weighed 1,949 pounds, with a base price of $1,919. Ford introduced the Pinto in sedan and hatchback models. Body shape was the same, but the trunk opening differed. Ford added a 2-door wagon, the Pinto Squire, in 1972, and a more luxurious version, the Mercury Bobcat, in 1975. The Pinto's fuel tank was placed right behind the rear axle, with the fuel filler in the left rear quarter panel. When the Pinto was rear-ended, even at moderate speed, the fuel tank was driven into the rear axle, which had protruding bolts on the back of the differential housing that would puncture the tank. This wasn't a problem on the Capri, which had its gas tank located above the axle. Additionally, the fuel filler neck could tear out of the tank. The resulting fuel spill could be ignited in several ways: sparks from the crash, a lit cigarette in the car, or by the car that struck the Pinto as it drove into the spray of the spilled fuel. Potentially catching on fire wasn't Pinto's only problem. Its rear-end structure wasn't designed to properly absorb hard impacts, and the buckling floor pan would separate from the rear fenders, allowing fuel and flames into the Pinto's cabin. Furthermore, body deformity could jam the door shut, preventing escape from the burning Pinto and making rescue more difficult. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration investigated rear-end collisions involving the 1970 to 76 Ford Pintos and Mercury Bobcats, resulting in fuel spillage and fires. NHTSA concluded that 27 Pinto occupants had died in these crashes, and a further 24 Pinto occupants sustained non-fatal burn injuries. Ford reported fatalities in other vehicles, presumably the cars that struck the Pinto, but the NHTSA did not quantify fire-related deaths in other vehicles involved in the collisions. These numbers were much lower than were commonly reported. In Pinto Madness, Mother Jones estimated that at least 500 people had been killed in Pinto crashes and speculated that the number could be as high as 900. Author Peter Wyden, in his book The Unknown Iacocca, repeated the claim of Jim Musselman, an attorney who worked with Ralph Nader, that almost 900 people had been killed in Pinto crashes resulting in fire. Pintos were the kind of car that served a purpose: affordable transportation for every nerd with a driver's license and no car guy soul. A Pinto would get owners from point A to point B, eventually, and with little chance for romance along the long, lonely way for these future Bill Gates. Then, a Ford dealer in California saw the inner beauty of the Pinto and decided he needed to give it an image makeover to bring out its inner badass self. It was a tall order for Jack Stratton when it came to his Pinto Pangra concept. He experimented with his idea and attempted to incorporate the rakish lines of the iconic Datsun 240Z into his Pinto project. It was a lipstick on a pig moment of enormous proportions, and eventually he settled for a fiberglass nose with hideaway headlights. Stratton added turbo boost to the anemic four-banger, then he beefed up the suspension into a serious handling machine with plenty of power. The only fly in the ointment was that the Pangras ran afoul of California road safety laws and emission regulations. The diminutive Pintos became little outlaws in California, and only 38 of them managed to get into the hands of buyers, according to Stratton. Through all of this, a car legend was born, albeit one few car guys ever knew existed, and it was a Pinto in wolf's clothing. John Russell was well aware of the Pinto Pangra because he is a Pinto fanatic who even has a tattoo of a 1974 Pinto horn ring emblem. He owned a Pinto in 1986 that died after several 100,000 miles on the road and became a sentimental favorite for John. It also ignited his undying affection for the little Ford subcompacts. We spotted his Pinto Pangra tribute station wagon at a show and asked John about his uniquely styled wagon. John was quick to point out his wagon was indeed a tribute car and not one of the original Pangras from the Jack Stratton stable. His 1972 Pinto bore all the trademark style of the original Pangras, including their custom fiberglass front ends with manually operated hideaway headlights. John's version had a little less jump than a real Pangra because his car had its original factory four-banger under the hood. His Pinto is comfortable at around 55 miles per hour on the road. Its happy point in John's words. Stratton then turned his attention to the chassis, where he worked with Connie to develop a handling package that included valve shocks, a 2-inch drop, 7-inch wide magnesium wheels, and revised suspension geometry. These modifications transformed the Pinto into a nimble handler, one that could dart through corners with precision and poise. A period brochure ROM, Huntington Ford, claimed that the Pangra would be able to pull 874 GS on a skid pad before it broke traction. Like it or not, it was clear that the Pangra suspension overhauls were enough to give it some pretty serious handling capabilities for the time. With all the groundwork laid, all that was left to do was inject the Pinto with some serious power. And for that, Stratton had a plan that would push the boundaries of what an American compact car could do. The stock Pinto engine was never meant to be a fire-breathing performance unit in its factory form. It barely crept past the 9 horsepower, and that was on a good day. But Stratton didn't want to go the Motion Vega route and stuff a V8 under the hood, as that would totally upset the balance of the Pinto in the turns. With this lightweight platform, the only thing they could do to get the power they needed and maintain the car's balance, at a small cost to the weight distribution, would be through Ford induction in the Pangra case that would be the turbocharger. Stratton partnered with the legendary tuner, a name synonymous with turbocharger innovation in the 70s. Together, they fitted the Pinto's 2-liter single overhead cam 4 with an air research turbocharger that was drawn through a 2-barrel carb, boosting the power output from around 90 horsepower to a remarkable 175 horsepower, nearly doubling the stock figure. And this wasn't just any bolt-on setup. It was a carefully engineered system designed to maximize performance while still maintaining reliability. The turbo was tuned to run at around 10 psi of boost, thanks largely to the 7-to-1 compression ratio on the Pinto motor, which now made it a more boost-friendly environment. Water injection was even included to ensure that the engine could handle the increased cylinder pressures without compromising durability. When turbocharge applications, like the Yanko Turbo Vegas, could not get the EPA's approval for a similar project, and the result of all these modifications done on the Pangra was a 0-to-60 sprint in just about 7.5 seconds, and it could tear through the quarter mile in the low 15s, which made it faster than the 240Z and the 914. Not bad for a Pinto, right? The Pinto Pangra was on sale from 1972 to 1973 through Huntington Ford. In total, estimates say that during its brief production run, Stratton sold somewhere between 20 to 50 complete turnkey Pangra cars as well as several versions of the kits to people who wish to do the modifications themselves. Today, though, there are very few of these cars left, literally just a handful of them across the kits and the factory ones. So, if you happen to stumble on a strange-looking Pinto at a car show, take some time to go look at it because you never know, it could be a Pangra, which meant it was actually one of the most unlikely yet capable sports cars of the day. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and share this video if you found it insightful. Also, let me know what you think about the transformation of the Ford Pinto into the Pinto Pangra down in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So until next time, we'll see you on the road.